This is St. Louis on the Air from St. Louis Public Radio. I'm Elaine Cha. Part of the Missouri History Museum's St. Louis Sound exhibit acknowledges the contributions of KDHX in bringing world music, blues, folk, new wave, and hip-hop to this region's airwaves. At 88.1 on the FM dial since 1987, the exhibit notes, quote, "For any radio station to survive 30 years is a feat, but it's especially impressive for a grassroots community station filled by volunteers. The station's DJs are some of the leading archivists of the city's music history and often were a vital part of that history," end quote. Well, KDHX announced late Friday afternoon that it is stopping live broadcasts, only running repeats, and that it let go all of its volunteer DJs. In a moment, we'll talk with two former DJs. But first, here with me is Jeremy Goodwin, St. Louis Public Radio's Arts and Culture Senior Reporter. Jeremy, welcome back to the show.
Hi, Elaine. Thank you.
So, Jeremy, bring us up to speed. Why did KDHX make this decision?
That's a good question, Elaine, and there's different kinds of answers to that. The statement said the station lacks the resources to continue as it has been, and that's kind of a big shoe. A lot of people were afraid we're going to drop it sometime, but the station didn't go off the air. It's just playing repeats of previously broadcast shows. So why could it not be DJs sitting in that studio? That's unclear to me. Also, the board fired its volunteers. These are people who, through their work for the station, had something called associate member status. That means they get to vote on some of the really big stuff at the station. So one way to interpret Friday's move, since it is still on the air, KDHX is, that rather than persuading its members about a big change in direction, the board merely took away their vote.
Mm-hmm. So this is not new in that there's been turmoil at the station for some time. And Jeremy, you've been covering that. Is there like a Cliff's Notes or like an in case you missed it version of that turmoil that you can offer to help people understand maybe who have not been following the reporting you've done?
Well, we know the station has been losing money, but that's in part because of widespread community outrage over the leadership's actions. They've been firing DJs by the handful and then making it very difficult for anyone outside of the board to have a say in what's happening through tightening control over elections, moderating a public comment section in board meetings that is no longer there, various ways of sort of cutting down the feedback loop from the people who are affected by these policies. The board might also point out that it has made the DJ ranks more inclusive than it has. It's absolutely true. There are voices on that station that were not there before, having conversations specifically about Black life in St. Louis that weren't necessarily on those airwaves before.
Mm-hmm. So the response that you have received, I understand that you've reached out to KDHX for further comment. What has that elicited so far?
I did get to have a text exchange with the board president, Gary Pearson, this morning, and he cited a reason that he wasn't going to be able to get on the phone this morning. But the announcement Friday stipulated the board will have no further comment about this. Basically, don't ask. And I have been periodically sending questions through the communication consultant that represents KDH leadership, and I have not had direct access to Mr. Pearson for over a year. So he did say he'd like to find another time to talk, but please, we're here. Give us a call.
And we're going to open the phone lines today, too, to hear from all of you out there. Jeremy, stay with us. We want to hear from you a little bit more. And the number that we would like you to call for you to share what your reaction is to the news about KDHX is 314-382-8255. That's 314-382-TALK. We're joined now by two former volunteer KDHX DJs. Caron hosted the show Wax Lyrical, which featured singer-songwriters for nearly 11 years. She was let go in September of 2023. Caron, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Elaine. A pleasure to be here.
We also have River Reinsch with us. River started at the station in March of last year and hosted the show Alternative Angle, which focused on artists breaking and pushing musical and social boundaries. River, welcome to you as well.
Thank you, Elaine. I'm happy to be here.
So, River, I'd like to start with you. You received the notice on Friday afternoon that your position was eliminated.
Yes.
What went through your mind when you received that?
Well, initially it was shock. I have been a volunteer at the station for this past year. It was around February of last year when I started getting engaged with the station. And I'd had a lot of conversations with the executive director, Kelly Wells, over this past year, in which we've discussed various projects and ways that I can move forward in helping with the station. So I'd been in the process of hosting volunteer connections events, which was something Kelly Wells had said was an important thing for her. And I'd also been in the process of beginning some new media opportunities, such as a podcast and also on-air interviews that Kelly had supported me through the entire time. And so when I received that email Friday afternoon, it was very, very shocking because everything that I've been working so hard for over the past year was just really ripped right out from under me. Mm-hmm. And so it was surprise, anger, and confusion is what I felt initially.
Yeah. So, Jeremy, you had mentioned earlier that the letting go of some of the DJs who'd been there for some time had made room for some other folks to come in who previously were not able to. And River, you were part of that wave. So there was that opening because DJs had either quit or, as I said, had been let go. This turmoil has been going on for a long time. Did you have any apprehension walking into KDHX last year, especially given some of the things that were out, in the open about the culture there?
I had known of the situation involving the fired DJs when I started the process to get on KDHX. I was apprehensive, but I was also very excited because KDHX has been a station that I've been listening to my entire life. And so, yes, there was apprehension going in, but I had been assured by Kelly Wells through my meetings with her, as well as some other volunteer connections people. And so those apprehensions were eased through my conversations with them.
Mm-hmm. We heard from Dan, who wrote on Facebook, "I grew up listening to KDHX. It was one of the first stations to show me music could be more than what was on the rest of the radio and what the rest of the radio plays. I kept listening online for many years after moving away from St. Louis, and it inspired me to get involved in community radio myself. Very sad to see how things went down over the last few years. This station should have been on the air another 30 plus years, and it's sad that it's gone." So, Caron, you have had more time to adjust to being let go, and that happened in the fall of 2023. For you, what was it like to hear Friday's news?
I was surprised as well, taken aback that everybody had gotten a mass email, although that is how the initial 10 of us that were let go, or I guess there were 13. It started with Tom Papa Ray, Andy Coco, and Dre Stein were let go from their shows, and then there were 10 of us that received a mass email as well. So for them to take off all the on-air DJs, especially with the, I guess the current rhetoric that it's more representing the community. I had been watching all of the board meetings, and they would paint as sunny of a picture as they could in the public portion. I obviously don't know what was happening in the private. They would go into executive session and have more discussion. But it seemed to be that they were getting more online listenership, and a more diverse listenership was the picture they were painting. So to suddenly say, okay, we can't even support our free labor force seemed really shocking to me. And that they're playing, reruns. I was hearing, they're playing Christmas music the other day and things like that. And so I'm really actually just very soul sick about it because I loved KDHX so much. I believed in the mission of building community through media, which is the mission of KDHX. And my sort of argument over the years has been, we still need to be in the community. We need to be out in the various like festivals and fairs that happen in St. Louis. There should be a KDHX presence. We should be interviewing artists that come to town. We should really be presenting what is best about music in St. Louis.
Mm-hmm. Best about music. There's also this question about what is best for those who are listening. And Caron, you were let go at a time when station leaders said that they wanted a staff that better represented the diversity of the St. Louis community, and that some of the DJs there at that time were resistant to that change. What do you make of that?
That was, I would say, apocryphal, because we weren't told anything about a DEI shift or asked in any way to engage in a shift in the station to bring on more diversity. And I would have been very receptive to that, I know personally. My first notice that we were let go and sort of labeled anti-DEI was actually in Jeremy's reporting that day that Gary Pearson had made the statement that they were trying to diversify the airwaves, and we were somehow resistant to that.
Mm-hmm. Jeremy, based on what we're hearing now from Caron and River, you covered a protest outside KDHX over the weekend. To what extent is what River and Caron are sharing reflected in what you saw there? Or was there anything else that you were hearing?
The complaints have been pretty consistent for the past 2 years or so, I think, among folks who have issues with this. Basically, since the board made these changes to the station, which they have an argument for why that's the right thing to do, but I haven't seen a real good faith engagement with the criticism. I've seen a scorched earth kind of public relations campaign where they have insisted, since this has started, it's a small group of malcontents who don't have the station's best interest at heart, who aren't representing the community. Mm-hmm. But what about the 500 local musicians who signed a letter asking for new leadership? What about the 100 local business people who signed a letter asking for new leadership? What about the plummet in ratings from the ratings services that we look at KDHX? So by any metric I can see, there's a lot of issue out there in the community with how things are going. And while that's happened, we've seen the board exert more control over the board itself. For instance, there was a seat that was up last year that's one of the 3 that are designated to represent associate members. Mm-hmm. And the board allowed one person on the ballot to fill that seat representing the members. Mm-hmm. So that's the kind of thing that leads people saying, why is a small group of people making all these decisions, and why does there seem to be no ability to affect that?
Yeah. And we heard from Jason on Facebook who was sort of saying much of what you've just talked about. Jason wrote, KDHX was once a beloved community fixture, but when those who loved it, both DJs and listeners, spoke out against what they were doing, their response was arrogant and self-righteous. We need to take a very quick break here, but we'll be back shortly to continue this conversation about KDHX announcing Friday afternoon that it's stopping live broadcasts. What is your reaction to this news about KDHX? You can give us a call at 314-382-8255. That's 314-382-TALK. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio.
The Gateway brings you the day's news each weekday from around the St. Louis region and the state capitals in Jefferson City.
Our schools are accredited. We don't need this bill.
And Springfield.
How many more years must pass before lawmakers see time is of the essence?
I'm Abby Lyrical. Join me each weekday for The Gateway on the STLPR app or wherever you get podcasts.
Welcome back. Let's return to our conversation about KDHX announcing late Friday afternoon that it's stopping live broadcasts and that the community radio station let go of all its volunteer DJs. Dan is calling from Weldon Spring. Dan, welcome to St. Louis on the Air.
Thank you. And aside from the obvious loss of just the music that these volunteers curated, the other major loss that I'm feeling is really on a more personal level. And KDHX was a place where you could easily dial up the phone, talk to the DJ about the music that they were playing. And just as an example, I met Art Dwyer in person maybe a few times, but I called the show a number of times, listened to him religiously and others. But the friendships were developed with these folks. And I think, and that's part of the community radio. Mm-hmm. And so, in addition to all the other senseless loss that, by the action of leadership there, that's the other drastic piece of this or horrible piece of this. And yeah, if there's any way for that to be reestablished, that would certainly be great. But mm-hmm. it just seems so senseless that it's gotten to this point.
Right. Dan, thank you so much for calling. We also have Rob, who's calling from St. Louis. Rob, you're on St. Louis on the Air.
How are you? Hello?
Yes.
Hey, how are you?
I'm well. Go ahead.
So I, like Caron and River, was one of the people that got let go. I got let go on Friday. And it's great you guys are covering this. I think the thing that a lot of folks in the community are feeling is that this has been going on even before it was like an issue that made attention, right? It's been going on for at least a decade. Mm-hmm. And I think it's emblematic for not having voices anymore in St. Louis. We're losing all these like great cultural voices in our city. And I think KDHX was really instrumental in that because it was curated by people that not only knew music, but knew the community and sort of were attached to that. So I think the loss that we're all feeling, both as people that have lost radio shows that we've poured years into doing, is not only for ourselves. We're like doing this whole grief process for what we've lost, right? But we're also grieving for what the community's lost because the community has an amazing asset for mm-hmm. the arts and for nonprofits and for local bands, right. Everything. It's all gone.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Rob, for calling. Jeremy, what do you make of the role that KDHX has filled in this community?
I mean, it's been invaluable. It's, as folks have mentioned, it's having the booths at the cultural festivals. It's having a presence, being around, having. I mean, a lot of these DJs used to have traveling musicians who were coming into town. They'd pop into KDHX. That's one of the stops they would make mm-hmm. to talk about their upcoming show, maybe even play something in the studio. A real connection to the local music scene and the local venues in terms of touring musicians that you don't hear now when you listen. And certainly since Friday, you're not going to hear anything live.
Right. Now, Rob had mentioned that there were issues going back very far, not just in the few years that you've been covering it, Jeremy, but over a decade. And organizational culture, that is something that does not get established overnight. Caron, what was the culture like when you started at KDHX and when you were asked to leave?
Definitely a large shift in culture. I started under different leadership. And at the time, it was very visionary. It was, what can we do in the community? How can we really build community through media and meet the mission of KDHX? And we were working on raising the funds to move into the new building. And so we had all these materials with local musicians and music lovers and touring musicians who made the case for us that KDHX was essential to them in finding an audience and building an audience and having a reason to come to St. Louis. Mm-hmm. I know recently I was at a concert where one of the artists mentioned KDHX, and that's where he had gotten a toehold in St. Louis market and built up to where he can play local clubs
right.
and make this a tour stop. Mm-hmm. And I was so fortunate. I got to interview Iron and Wine, Jim James from My Morning Jacket, just so many impressive national musicians who made time for KDHX, as well as a ton of local musicians that, even became my friends over the years and made sure I got their latest music when it was coming out. And I know River and I spoke. He actually does all local shows where he was gearing up for one where he could really showcase the talent here in St. Louis. And so I think that is just a tremendous loss.
Right. And then, River, for you to have to tell those, they've found out that this is not going to happen. What kind of feeling does that leave you with?
Well, it's very disappointing and it's very sad. As Caron said, today I was going to be planning my all-local set for next week. I did once a month, I would play all local artists from the underground scene here in St. Louis, mostly of the younger generation, people around my age. And over the last year, I'm 20, and I would say early 20s, I've built a really strong community around this scene. And over the last year, community is a word that keeps coming up, but I just really like to reiterate how special the radio is. A lot of these artists that I was playing had never been on the radio before. So I had people text me that they got their mom called them crying, and just hearing them on the radio, that they gathered around the radio with their whole family, that they ran out of work without logging out to catch their show on air. And there's just something physical when music is played over the air. It interacts with physical space in a way that online streaming doesn't. Yes. And it was very, very special. And so it's sad. And I'm looking for alternatives to get these artists back on air as I feel they deserve to be.
And I want to make sure we get to that alternatives part. And we'll do that perhaps after we hear from Dan. Dan, go ahead.
Been a contributor to KDHX for 25 or more years, and I wonder, I still make my monthly gift and wonder what's happening to the money that's going there, and are there any feasible routes to regaining this wonderful station?
Dan, thank you so much. Jeremy, do you have any insight into that?
Well, I spoke to a volunteer this afternoon at the protest in front of the station Saturday, who said that the Love of KDHX activist group has gathered close to $100,000 in donations from people who say, give it to the station if there's a change in leadership, sort of hold it for us until there's a change. And then, when there's a change in leadership, that money will then be given to the station. So that money is sitting there at a time when donations are down.
Right.
So the question to me is, why is it so vital for leadership to not change? Why must it be these? Kelly Wells was executive director in 2019 when the station received a lot of accusations of sexual harassment and racism at the station, which they denied, and many of those were anonymous at the time.
Yeah.
But there hasn't been a change in leadership since then at the staff level, and Mr. Pearson was not chairman of the board at the time, but he was on the board. Both of them said they thought about resigning back in 2019 when they did a sort of Ask Me Anything over the air of KDHX. They thought about resigning in 2019. I guess they decided not to. We're here 6 years later. The station appears to be dying in front of us. Is there any way for anyone else to get involved and to try to resurrect this 37-year-old community project?
Right. Dan, thank you so much for your call and for getting us on that particular question. We also have Chris from the Shaw neighborhood calling. Chris, welcome to St. Louis on the Air.
Thank you for taking my call. First of all, many of the people that were fired and many of the DJs, they are really important parts of the St. Louis music community, whether they're writers, record store workers, musicians. This is or was the St. Louis music community, so losing those people has been enormous. But you just touched on it. My initial point was to say that Kelly Wells was accused of racism and harassment back in 2019. The board never interviewed any of the people that made those claims. They took Kelly's side, and then 5 years later, she's using DEI and diversity as a cudgel to eliminate all of her critics. And that's how it started with Papa Ray pointing out that she wasn't doing her job. He was accused of bullying and harassment and was canned. There was then a letter of no confidence signed by 29 current DJs. Only 10 were let go, of which I was one of them, along with Caron. And it's all been obfuscation and denial. And unfortunately, we have finally reached the point that we were waiting for.
Well, perhaps dreading, right? Chris, thank you for calling.
It's been like a slow motion car crash here, where sort of everyone has seen this developing over these last couple of years and waiting for sort of something to give. And it just, the situation seems to deteriorate. And the folks who are running the station, this is not what they wanted either. This is not the outcome they were looking for, as one would have to think. But this is where we are. So where do you go from here?
Mm-hmm. I think to jump in and kind of tie together this past little bit of the conversation is the word community. It keeps coming about. And something that Kelly Wells had talked to me about was building community around KDHX, building KDHX as a community in St. Louis. And to me, it doesn't feel like community to let go of over 100 volunteers and a mass email. It doesn't feel like community to have my email shut off day of with no warning, no way to talk to the audience that I've cultivated, and no way to connect with other volunteers at the station. It seems like almost all of their actions have been deliberately opposed to community. And I think if in these next steps forward, the way that we might be able to save the station is to come together as a community in large. I believe that's going to be very, very important for all of us to continue to speak out and continue to advocate for the radio community that we want to see in St. Louis.
And we said it before, but we should say it again. Jeremy, you reached out to KDHX for further comment, and thus far they've declined to give more specifics than what has been released in these statements. Tom is calling from St. Louis. Welcome to the show.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to bring out a part of the dynamic that I think makes it so emotional for people. I'm one of, I guess, thousands who've, either contributed or volunteered in some small way. And from that perspective, I know that there's a group of people who built this thing from the ground up. I mean, they used to go out to the transmitter in Arnold or wherever and dig. They literally built it from the ground up over the decades and made it what it was. And then these people who didn't build it, over those decades, got a hold of it, including a director who's not even from St. Louis. And it seems, the way it looks, it seems out of spite. They're just wrecking it. It really looks like it's being done out of spite. And I just hope that either the big funders who've backed it, in recent decades will help it get into the good hands again, or another community, the Save KDHX, Love KDHX people who are sucking away those funds will be able to get a hold of it again and make it something like it was before. That community has stayed together. They're just not on the air.
Right. Thank you so much for calling, Tom. Caron, I had asked earlier about the culture of the station at the time you were there. How things have developed, or in many cases people would characterize it as devolved. But this opportunity, maybe, because things have gotten as bad as they are, do you think that all these folks who have rallied, like that there is some room for there to be a new beginning or a new start?
I think there's hope. I was upset Friday when I read, and I think I posted, time of death, 7 p.m. on Friday. But I would say in inverse to my post that there are so many people who care and are willing to devote their time and talent and treasure that we could come together as a community to save KDHX. And that's, there's the Save KDHX movement, which has been really passionate, and I'm part of the Love of KDHX, which stands for League of Volunteer Enthusiasts of KDHX. And we're the ones that have been kind of socking away some contributions in hope of being able to turn things around should new leadership emerge. I feel the original issue happened when Kelly was made interim director and then just given the directorship without any search. There was the board at the time, people would tell me, said, no one wants this job. And it was like, who did you ask?
Okay, sure, sure.
I think, it was a little rocky as Bev Hacker was exiting. She had written an op-ed in the RFT about being let go by the board and the issues with the taxes and things like that. But I think then Kelly came aboard, and she, in her own words, was doing multiplication by subtraction.
Okay.
Which makes no sense to me. I just think, less is less.
Yeah.
And so she was running a radio station without a program director, no music director. When Andy Coco retired from the station, there was no production director. People who trained me to be a DJ, River and I were talking about his experience where they're basically like, spend a day, here's how you operate the board. Okay, go ahead, do your show.
Yeah.
And I had weeks of training, and even shadowed a DJ, was doing board operations for him while he was doing his show.
So there were clearly some issues with capacity and the calculations that were being made.
And I think that culture just maybe, the DJs weren't as invested in as they used to be.
We need to take a quick break here, but we'll be back to continue this conversation. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio.
If you have a smart speaker, you have access to the entire world of NPR and St. Louis Public Radio. All the latest news and all the captivating stories. Activate our voices with yours by telling your smart speaker to play St. Louis Public Radio.
Welcome back. Let's return to our conversation about KDHX announcing Friday afternoon that it's stopping live broadcasts. What is your reaction to this news about KDHX? We want to hear from you. Give us a call at 314-382-8255. I am in studio with STLPR Arts and Culture Senior Reporter Jeremy Goodwin, as well as Caron House and River Reinsch, two former volunteer DJs. We have a caller from Howell Springs. That's Steve. Steve, welcome to St. Louis on the Air.
Yeah, how are you all doing? Yeah, it's just kind of funny. I've been listening to this radio station for close to 25 years now, and it's just kind of funny. There's one common denominator that keeps coming up in everybody's conversation, and her name is Kelly. Did anybody do any background check on her? If you deep dive into her a little bit, she's done this before. Out in Colorado, a non-for-profit, she sunk it. I don't know what the logistics are or legal problems, but, it's a non-for-profit. We've all I've given money to them. I've enjoyed it. I've had friends be on the show. I've had friends go all the way to the Grand Ole Opry.
Steve, thank you so much again, calling from Howell Spring. Now, Caron, you had mentioned that there was no search for an executive director. when Kelly Wells stepped in. So I think this is some of what Steve was referring to. And we had Jorge, who wrote on Facebook, shocked and horrified that bad management can rob St. Louis of such a valuable resource for music lovers and music makers. The board of directors and Kelly Wells should be ashamed of themselves. Jeremy, do you have any insight into why Kelly Wells remains in this position?
I'd love to speak more about the reasoning behind a lot of these moves. It's difficult to do that when the station communicates only in the form of these short, very carefully worded press release messages, which is the only contact I've had. They have spoken with at least one other media outlet in the past year. Mm-hmm. But generally, questions go in or a request to talk to someone goes in, and what comes back is a paragraph that has clearly been worked on by PR professionals. It's usually very general, doesn't necessarily answer the question. So it's I'd like to better represent what they're trying to do here. Mm-hmm. And I've heard enough from long-term people at the station. Was there an old guard of people or a clique of people at the station who were kind of putting their foot in the way of necessary changes? Maybe. I mean, that's not implausible. But I haven't seen the organization engage its stakeholders and its members and its listeners to bring them forward to where they want to take the station. It's been very much a top-down sort of thing, announcing the direction and saying, follow us. Mm-hmm. But something you'll hear in nonprofits sometime is your audience, your stakeholders give you permission to be what you want to be. Mm-hmm. You can put whatever you want in the mission statement, but if the people who are there are not on board with that, then there's a disconnect. Mm-hmm. And I haven't seen a strong effort to bring the public along with the station leadership. Right. I've seen complaints about the criticism. I've seen denigration of the critics saying that they're the problem. But I haven't really seen just a Q&A where people can come in and ask basic questions.
Yes.
For instance.
And speaking of community and questions, Jay is calling from South St. Louis. Jay, what has your experience been?
Well, my experience, I just wanted to reiterate what Jeremy was saying, that he reached out to KDHX and got no reply. My wife and I, Erin and I, we reached out to the station after Papa Ray, one of the original founders of KDHX, was fired. And we wanted to know why he was fired. We wanted to know the specifics. We met with the head of donor relations, which was nice of her to meet with us face-to-face, but all she said was the exact same thing that we read in the newspaper. Now, we've been members for 30-plus years. We've volunteered. We've donated money every year. And we felt that we needed to be involved in these decisions, which we had been years ago. We were able to vote on board members as being a member of the station. Mm-hmm. So just summing this all up, we decided we are not going to be members anymore. We are not going to donate to this station until the leadership is changed.
Yes. Jay, thank you so much for sharing that story with us. Now, River, you had something to say a little while ago.
Yeah, so I think a big part of this conversation when people are discussing KDHX is just a lot of confusion. And like, why is the board and Kelly, why are they operating in this way? And being inside the station, I think I had a better understanding. A reason they've continually given is financial difficulties. However, these financial difficulties have almost entirely arisen because of the direct management of the board of directors and Kelly Wells, the repeated dismissal of volunteer complaints, and also the lawsuits that were waged against KDHX when the board and Kelly bypassed KDHX bylaws to remove people from the board of directors and also to remove the voices of us volunteers in this previous purge. Like, as Jeremy mentioned earlier in the conversation, as volunteer DJs at the station, we were counted as associate members. And so we got votes in important decisions at KDHX. And I believe that this purge was incredibly intentional to take that power away from us as volunteers. And I also believe that's the reason they shut our emails off immediately, was to stop us from organizing with fellow volunteers. it's just the financial situation is really sad, and it's a reason they continually give, but that they've brought upon themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And community members and underwriters have stated that their support would come back if management changed, but it's just something that the current board has refused to do.
Mm-hmm. We have John, who is calling from University City. John, welcome to St. Louis on the Air.
Oh, thanks. I'm glad to be here. I've had a show on KDHX, or did, for 32 years. I'm a little bit of an outlier because what I do is, for lack of a better term, we'll call it world music. I do folk music and traditional music from many, many other countries. The show turns out to have had listeners all around the world. I get emails from people who hear it online, or did, from Australia, several from Germany, and so forth. And so the station, had a presence more than just in St. Louis. When I first joined, as has already been pointed out, the bylaws had three kinds of memberships, or three ways of voting people onto the board. If you simply contributed to the station, you could actually vote for board members. And you could have a meeting and you could discuss issues. If you're a volunteer, then you have the associate members from whom you've heard a lot this morning. And that was done on purpose. It was very inefficient, as democracy always is, but, two heads are better than one, and the advantage was that issues could get discussed. The issues of diversity that they claim were not being addressed were actually being addressed. And then during COVID, meetings were shut down. And during that time, the board met and changed the bylaws so that could no longer occur. But we had community involvement. Like I said, anybody who contributed to the station could have input into who was on the board.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think we've lost a lot. We lost the community, and you've heard a lot from those people, not just local musicians, but people who were involved in a wide variety of the arts long after the papers had to slow down their arts criticism and so forth. We've continued to do that on KDHX.
Right. John, thank you so much for calling. Jeremy, what John has mentioned about the bylaws, what do the bylaws state about a potential sale of the license? I mean, do you know anything?
Yeah, my reading of the bylaws is that it requires that for that specific thing, a sale of the broadcast license, for instance, it requires a 2/3 vote of all the associate members who are present at the meeting and a 2/3 vote of the board of directors. Now, I sent a question to the station through their representatives in December. Are you considering selling the broadcast license or otherwise moving to an online-only operation? And they did not deny that. I received a response that basically was off topic. Mm-hmm. It said the leadership are great stewards of this community resource and they're working hard to make it better. That's sort of a thing. If there are any updates, we'll let you know. So that's a very big denial on a question that's at the center of the future of this organization.
Right. And they'll let you know.
If there are any updates, we'll hear.
We have Dwight, who's calling from Dutchtown. Dwight, go ahead.
Yes, I was a volunteer reviewer for theater productions produced in the city of St. Louis, city and the environs, for about 5 years in the late 80s and the early 90s. And the culture was decidedly communitarian. There was a heavy emphasis on the homegrown and the indispensable sort of point of view of the folks in the neighborhood. And I'm also a musician, and I used to sit in with Artie Dwyer's Soulard Blues Band from time to time. And of course, he was a stalwart, and may still be. Well, I guess not now. Stalwart Friday afternoon show from Artie Dwyer. Mm-hmm. His blues show was one of the best in town. In fact, one of the best in the United States, I'd have to say. I have to echo John's remarks about the range of this station in terms of its appeal and its flexibility and its ability to adapt to and listen to not just the neighborhood but the world. And I guess we're all going to be really sorry if this resource vanishes from the scene.
Mm-hmm.
All I can say is that I, for one, will be mourning its passing.
Yes. Dwight, thank you for calling. We also have Matt calling from St. Louis. Matt, go ahead.
Hey, thank you for the opportunity to speak on this issue. I, too, did a couple of shows that I stepped away on September 25th of 2023 after we held our emergency meeting where we elected new board members and relieved a few others that weren't owning up to their obligations. And so the optics make this look like a grand scheme to sell the license overall. Where the money is going to shift hands to and whether legally or illegally, we don't know. For River and all those other new DJs, I feel like they have been used as pawns to achieve this objective. John Wendland, who was fired on the 22nd on the Friday massacre, he had written a letter up that we delivered to all the board members to come together. This was late last year and figure out a way to solve the financial crisis, which we have a really good feeling that we could do. And that was not responded to whatsoever. There will be a meeting this next Tuesday from 7 o'clock on at Off Broadway that will have a discussion on what's going on with the love of KDHX, League of Volunteer Enthusiasts. I thank you for taking my call, and I hope to hear more responses. Thank you.
Thank you. So, River and Caron, I mean, you're no longer DJs for KDHX. Do you have any hope of returning at some point, Caron, very quickly?
I would love it. I had such a great sense of community with my listeners. People would call and say, I'm tinkering with my car and I have the radio on and listening, or I'm having coffee with my spouse and we're both enjoying it. And that was really special. I want to thank Matt for calling in. The meeting actually is this Tuesday.
This Tuesday.
That he's talking about at Off Broadway.
Okay.
At 7 o'clock.
Off Broadway, 7 o'clock. River?
Yeah, I just real quick wanted to say thank you for having us on today. This is an important conversation to hold, and I really hope that KDHX can come back on air because it's a very, very important institution in St. Louis and has been for decades. Real quickly, before you let us go, there's 3 words that have come up throughout our conversation, and they are diversity, inclusion, and community. And those have been the stated goal of Kelly, the board of directors, and KDHX. And this recent purge is the antithesis of all 3 of those words. So we just need to continue to be vocal about this issue and speak out and hope for the best for community radio.
Mm-hmm. And Jeremy, since you'll be continuing to cover this story, what is it that you'll be looking for, and maybe what are 1 or 2 of the biggest questions that you have?
Well, timing-wise, those bylaws require that there be an annual meeting in February. It doesn't say when, but in February, which is when people anticipated perhaps a proposal to sell the license. Question is now, who's left to vote? Are there any additional volunteers who haven't been removed? That was unclear. Is there anyone left to make decisions other than the 7 people on the board of directors?
Mm-hmm. I've been talking with STLPR Arts and Culture senior reporter Jeremy Goodwin, as well as Caron House and River Reinsch, who are 2 former volunteer DJs. Thank you all for joining us today, and keep us up to date on what it is you're seeing and feeling and hearing.
We'll do, Elaine.
Thank you, Elaine.
Today's episode was produced by our executive producer, Alex Hoyer.
Audio engineering and podcast design by Aaron Dorr.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations. And leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thanks.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri St. Louis.